Attention, Canadians. Do you feel disconnected from our current political system? This could be our last chance to take a real legal stand for our rights. It's time to shift the political power to its rightful owners, the Canadian citizens and Indigenous peoples of Canada. Dive into our history, understand the need for change, and embark on the quest for true democracy. Are you concerned about our nation's commitment to human rights and self-governance? The power shift to freedom aligns with vital treaties and international laws enabling us to claim our rightful place as collective head of state. We advocate legally replacing the Crown, King Charles III, and our partocracy system with a true democracy, the peoples as the true, collective head of state with veto power over our governance, to ensure your voice counts more than party interests. When our national collective civil and political rights are respected, your influence on policies will be direct and impactful. Join us on this noble struggle to make every Canadian and Indigenous peoples a meaningful participant in our future as collective head of state, which was legally owed and kept from us since the patriation of our Constitution, an official decolonization from the United Kingdom of 1982. It's time to correct the past of our government's lies and omissions to the people of our great country before it is too late. People 15 years old and over can sign our Canadian People's Referendum at canadianreferendum.ca and unite for our rights as the collective head of state in our Constitution. Together, we can be the example in reshaping Canada's future, not just for us, but for all peoples worldwide, once and for all. Are you ready to be part of this transformative movement? Join the Power Shift to Freedom movement by the Canadian People's Union and be part of a bold vision for Canada's future. Visit thecpu.ca for more details. Embrace and face the change required on your part to shape our future.
Ukraine is simply a piece and in the way.
We hear from President Zelensky that he wants the US to stand firmer. He says the US need to stand more firmly on our side. We saw a post from President Trump saying that he doesn't feel Zelensky is ready to do this deal, and when he's ready, he can come back and sign the minerals deal. Do you think that relationship is irreparable? Also taking into account that Trump disliked Zelensky back in 2019 when the whole impeachment, his first impeachment, started from a conversation he had with President Zelensky.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. If you look at the confrontation that took place yesterday in the Oval Office, Trump kept bringing up the missiles that he had given up to Zelensky in his first term and wanted Zelensky to thank him. Those missiles were at the heart of the blackmail that he withheld, that he wanted Zelensky to, in exchange for which he wanted Zelensky to produce false disinformation, dirt on Joe Biden in 2019-2020 that led to Trump's first impeachment. He wanted Zelensky to exonerate him in that conversation, for which Trump was guilty. So I think we need to step back and not be disoriented by what's happened and think about this not in terms of simply the US-Ukraine relationship, but that Ukraine is a function of Trump's relationship with Putin and Russia, and that he has already begun that policy switch. He's disbanded the task force on klepto capture. established to enforce sanctions and target Russian oligarchs following the invasion of Ukraine. He's deprioritized Russia as a cyber threat, and he's disbanded and ordered the cessation of the U.S. Cyber Command's planning of operations against Russian cyber activities. He's halted monitoring of online misinformation by the Russians that are targeting his base, conservatives, that are riling people up. And there is potential sanctions relief that Trump wants to grant to the Russians. This is all about a larger deal or a grand alliance with Russia, of which Ukraine is simply a piece and in the way.
So do you think it's not going to be long before we see an official deal between the US and Russia? I mean, you've got to ask yourself, why is Donald Trump prepared to burn so many bridges with the Europeans, with Ukraine? For what exactly? What do you think is driving him?
Well, look at what he said in the meeting. The meeting is very revealing. And people should go back to what Trump's own words were. He says, you want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal? It doesn't work that way. And then he said, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. So what did he go through with Putin? And he says that he made deals with Putin. In the first term, there was no formal agreement that he ever made with Russia. What were the deals? We don't know.
What happens to relationships between the UK and the US, between Europe and the US, if the US in a few months' time announce a deal between themselves and Russia? How do Western leaders and leaders from across the world deal with the US if it goes into business with the Russian administration?
Well, Trump is desperate to go into business with Putin, and he always has been ever since he tried to negotiate a hotel deal in Moscow, going back decades, and all the way through the 2016 campaign. And he's wanted to do all sorts of deals since. And we don't know how much money he's taken from Putin after he was cut off by the New York bankers in the early 90s and never given loans again from Wall Street, and yet got subsidized through Deutsche Bank, probably as a conduit. So we have no idea what's in the background here. But as for the Europeans, the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has stated that France and Britain should extend their nuclear umbrella to Germany and to all the NATO countries, given the Trump position right now. So I think that might be almost inevitable. The truth is that umbrella is already extended through Article 5 of the NATO treaty, but it may need to be restated, and there may need to be some new formulation through a Europe Defense Pact involving Britain of a NATO 2.0 if Trump proceeds further with his desire to make a deal apart from everything else with Putin.
Sydney, as a former senior advisor to the Clinton administration, I'm assuming that you still have an ear to the ground with the Democrats. Where are the Democrats? I have not heard anything from the Democratic side. Now, but perhaps I've missed something, but where are the big Democrat voices after that meeting yesterday? What's the strategy from the Democrats?
Well, I think you heard them on American TV. There were a lot of them out there. And the Democrats generally, in terms of strategy, are particularly in the House of Representatives, taking a position before the budget negotiations for the domestic budget here, but also involves the foreign policy budget. And the the feeling among the Democrats is that the Republicans are going to have enormous difficulty reaching an agreement among themselves. They're in the majority, and that we could have a government shutdown as a result of the Republicans unable to pass a budget on their own with control of both houses. So that's where the politics lay with the Democrats and what they're focusing on right now. On the other hand, what's going on out in the country is a kind of rolling wave of the public awakening to what Trump is doing to the American government and to the country domestically. And you can see this in the spontaneous questions and anger at Republican congressmen in town halls. And that is something that's building. So what people are very aware of in Washington, people out in the country are becoming enlightened about. And it's going to spread and rise over the next few months.
Sydney Blumenthal, thank you for giving us so much of your time. I really do appreciate it. Can Putin's word be trusted by anyone? And does yesterday's display strengthen or weaken the US's negotiating position? Well, joining us now with his thought is Dmitry Gudkov. He's exiled Russian opposition politician and founder of the Anti-War Committee, which is against the war in Ukraine. Dmitry, thank you for giving us your time. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for having me, but I'm just one of the founders.
Okay, one of the founders of the Anti-War Committee. Dmitry, give us your thoughts there. Donald Trump thinks that actually Vladimir Putin respects him. Maybe he's afraid of Donald Trump, and therefore he won't dare to go against Donald Trump if he puts a negotiating deal on the table.
First, I would like to say that I'm profoundly disappointed about what happened yesterday in Washington. And regardless of how this dramatic scene is assessed, I can say that the war will continue. Unfortunately, that America is washing its hands of it, and the West is irreversibly divided. And at the same time, I know from many colleagues, from many politicians in the EU, that for now, Europe doesn't have enough weapons to sustain current levels of aid for Ukraine. And for now, there is no will, even political will, in the European countries to reduce social programs and to increase military expenses. That's a serious problem. And at the same time, from various sources, I found out that Putin has managed to prepare in the arm of 200,000 strong reserve. And unless the situation is overturned with a week, I don't know what would happen. But from my experience, and my experience has shown that events always unfold in the worst possible way. So, at the same time, I would like to say that we all, just my generation, we have grown accustomed to living in a world governed or at least influenced by the United States of America. It was always leading the global camp of democratic nations and ensuring the collective security. And we know that, we remember that, and we appreciate these efforts. And unfortunately, America, which was always the greatest country in the world, it seems that the era of it is ending, unfortunately, because now country is driven with the slogan "America's first."
Dmitry, what do you think? What do you think Vladimir Putin would have made of the scenes in the Oval Office yesterday?
I think that he benefited from this situation because Trump seems to repeat his narrative and the narrative of Putin's propaganda. And of course, I think, and I've been always telling that Putin is aimed of having a direct control over the occupied territory and indirect control over the whole Ukraine. So he needs influence on the whole Ukraine, and he I think he's going to demand too much from Ukraine, from Zelensky, and likely setting humiliating preconditions for negotiations. That's why I can imagine how it can be agreed without losing face.
Do you think he wants peace? Do you think? I mean, many people have said, look, Russia is struggling. They're struggling to fill the conscripts, to get enough people to fight. The economy is ticking along, but it's not doing great. Do you think Putin needs this peace deal? Does he want it? Does he want it?
I think that he doesn't want it right now. I will give you some figures. I'm also the founder of the think tank CASE. It's the Central of Analysis and Strategies in Europe, and we published 2 reports. The first about the economy situation, the Russian economy. Unfortunately, it looks pretty stable, and Putin has a lot of money for military expenses, so he can spend over $130 billion every year for within like 3 or 5 years, according to the Russian economists. And at the same time, he has more people to participate in the war, because Russia is the big country with the populations of 140 million. And he just announced the mobilization based on the commercial rails, and people fight for money. And Putin has a lot of money. He has like oil and gas, firstly oil, which Putin keeps selling for the good price. But Ukraine can be depleted if it loses the American aid. That's why I believe that Putin is assured that in 1 year or in 6 months or like in 1 year, he will be better in negotiation position. That's why I think he's not ready for the peace deal. So he will be trying to have this protracted, the conflict.
Okay. Dmitry, thank you so much for giving us your time. Really fascinating. I hope we get to speak again.
Thank you for making time. So you are the EU's top diplomat, which means you have to help represent 27 different countries. President Trump said the EU was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. What was your reaction to that remark?
Europe is a peace project. It was created so that we wouldn't have wars between the members of European Union, and we haven't had. And of course, also to do things together, cooperate more. Coming from a country that joined the European Union 20 years ago, we were actually, pushed by the Americans. You will not get into NATO, but Europe, the European Union is something that you should join, because it's a good project also for the transatlantic relations. So I was quite surprised to hear a comment like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what the president meant by it?
Well, you have to ask the president.
Well, it seems to reflect that there is some fairly high tension with the U.S. at this point.
Yes, the question is why? We have always been good allies. I mean, we have been working together, and we have been friends and allies what comes to the world in different parts of the world, what is happening. We have been cooperating, whether it comes to Ukraine, whether it comes to also Middle East. And we see in the world, we see powers like Russia, North Korea, Iran, more covertly China, working together. And I think this is the moment where we have to work together as transatlantic partners.
Mm-hmm. Well, Secretary of State Rubio, you had announced you intended to meet with him while you were here, and then that meeting was canceled. Why?
Well, it was said that it's calendar issues, but I'm sure we are going to meet again, because we had very good meetings in Munich, and there are a lot of topics that we need to discuss. So we are going to meet in G7 in 2 weeks' time.
So you don't think this was a slight?
Well, you have to ask Secretary of State, but I mean, we have had such good encounters before, so I don't really read into, you know, I know that we are not on top of our calendars, you know, things might happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're here now. France's President Emmanuel Macron was just here, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. President Zelensky is flying here. Are all of the European leaders coordinating? And if so, what's the message?
We are coordinating, and of course the message is there are several layers. So one is that the fight that Ukraine is having is not only about Ukraine's sovereignty, but it's much broader. It's about freedom of the free world, really. It is about the world where international law applies, and the world where might does not make right. It is clear that Russia attacked Ukraine. There's one aggressor and one victim, and we need to really make sure that Russia doesn't attack again. And for that, we need to concentrate our efforts. I mean, putting politically and economically pressure on Russia to stop this war, but at the same time also help Ukraine to defend itself.
Mm-hmm. But what you just said, it's factually accurate. Russia invaded Ukraine, but the Trump administration has decided now not to say that explicitly, arguing that the president needs negotiating room. Do you think that that's persuasive to Vladimir Putin?
Well, it is certainly, you know, a very strong Russian narrative that they want to really push, saying that, you know, oh, it's a conflict between two equal parties, you know, and to create this chaos where it's very clear. It is very clear. One country attacked another country very brutally with force and is bombing Ukraine every day. I mean, President Trump says that he wants the killing to stop. I don't think that anybody wants the killing to stop more than the Ukrainians. And in order to, you know, achieve that, we should all put the pressure on Putin, because he can stop the killing by not bombing Ukraine and the Ukrainians, so that they don't have to defend themselves. And that's why our plan, our policy is to really put the pressure on Russia. We shouldn't overestimate the power of Russia and underestimate our own power. We know that their economy is not doing well. I mean, their inflation is over 20%. Their national fund is almost completely depleted. They don't have the same revenues from gas and oil that they used to fund the war machine. So actually, if we concentrate our efforts, we can put the pressure so that they would stop the war, not to offer them anything, you know, on a plate in addition what they have already done.
So why do you think acknowledging who is responsible does matter?
Well, it does matter who is responsible, so who is accountable for this as well. And why it also matters is that we have the United Nations Charter, where we have agreed how countries are, you know, interacting with each other. And it says very clearly that you can't attack sovereignty, territorial integrity of another country. And if you do, there are consequences. And why is it important? It is important for small countries in the world, for whom this is the only thing that protects them. If we don't really defend this principle, then we're going to see all these developments that we don't want to see, because all the countries who are afraid of their neighbors will want to go for nuclear weapons, because this is the only thing that protects them. It's not the international law anymore. And all the countries who have appetite for their neighbor's territory will want to have a nuclear weapon, because it is the only thing, by, you know, threatening to use this weapon, you can have what you want, because this is what Russia is doing.
And yet, at the United Nations this week, you pointed out the U.S. aligned with new friends. Russia, Belarus, Sudan, North Korea at the UN. The U.S. voted with them and against a European-backed resolution about Ukraine that demanded the withdrawal of Russian troops. The Trump administration would say, it's a UN resolution. It doesn't have a practical impact. Does it?
Well, yes, not so directly. It doesn't have a practical impact, but it clearly, I mean, is saying what kind of principles in the world we are supporting. And of course, we were co-sponsoring together with the United States the resolution to support Ukraine. And it was a surprise to us that the US suddenly changed the position. I must, really point out that we had the resolution drafted together with the new administration regarding the support for Ukraine. But when they met the Russians, something happened after that because the behavior changed. So the question is, where do we go from here? Our will and wish is to work together with our transatlantic partners for the principles that the United States has always stood for. I mean, I'm coming from the country that regained our independence in 1991. It was the time when Ronald Reagan was really pushing hard for fight for freedom, and we are so grateful for America for doing this because we got our independence and freedom back, and therefore also the prosperity and the well-being of our people. So we are very grateful, and I don't want to see this. I don't want to let this go. I mean that America, is not fighting for freedom and independence and the principles, the basic principles of the international law.
So President Zelensky said Ukraine has intelligence that Russia plans to send troops to Belarus and from there stage forces either to attack Ukraine or another European country. Do you share that assessment that Russia will continue its march through Europe?
Russia has been investing more than 9% of its GDP on military. In comparison, European countries are spending 2%. I think my own country is spending over 3%, but I think America is spending something around 3 or 4% of its GDP. So if you're investing so much on the military, you will want to use it again. And that's why it is very important how we act here. In 2008, they attacked Georgia. Nothing happened. There was not a strong reaction from the West. In 2014, they annexed Crimea and attacked Ukraine. There was not a strong reaction. So there was a ceasefire, but ceasefire only gave them possibility to regroup and rearm. That's why it is extremely important that we don't make the same mistake again. If there is a pause, so they are able to get their forces together again, we will just see more wars. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants peace, but the peace has to be a lasting peace. And for lasting peace, it has to put the pressure has to be put on Russia so that they don't do this again.
So the President Zelensky and President Macron of France have both talked about creating Europe's own army, separate from NATO. Do you see that as likely?
I mean, NATO is a defense alliance, and it is comprised of 32 different armies of the NATO member states. So NATO structure is the military structure, and in terms of war, very important is who gives orders to whom. Mm-hmm. So if you have, those 32 armies that cooperate together, and you have one structure, then it's clear who gives orders to whom. If you have
now, it's the United States through the Supreme Allied.
Yes, it is true, but the structure is there. I mean, command structure, but also communication, everything that is necessary, how we work together. So if we say that we create a parallel structure, then when in terms of crises, then who gives orders to whom? Because the armies are just the 32. So that's why I haven't supported a special European army. I'm just saying that all the armies that are there in Europe, but also in NATO, need to work together.
So the EU right now does have sanctions on Russia, and Secretary Rubio has pointed to that, saying, look, Europe has a say in this. They're going to have to make their own decisions on sanctions. Do you think you can keep all 27 countries in line? and keep that pressure on Russia?
We have managed so far, and of course it's getting harder all the time. But we have managed to keep this unity. And
Hungary's prime minister threatens. Right?
That is true, but at the same time, I mean, we are also thinking of different plans because, you know, for example, the sanctions, the frozen assets, for example. I mean, we see Russia causing damage to Ukraine every day. We know what this costs. So when we have the frozen assets, then it is, you know, the proceeds can be used for really the damages that Russia has caused to Ukraine. And
this is 200 billion euros.
300 billion.
300 billion euros of Russian assets that are frozen. But why isn't that already being tapped? Is it just because the banking system is averse?
There are several arguments, and some countries are not in favor because of the different risks. But I think, you know, in the end, everybody will come to the same conclusion. It shouldn't be our taxpayers that pay for the damages caused by Russia in Ukraine. It should be Russia who pays.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about the trade dispute that seems to be brewing between the U.S. and the EU. President Trump said he's going to put a 25% tariff on imports on cars and all of the things. Do you think that a trade war is avoidable at this point? Do you plan to bring a complaint to the World Trade Organization?
We don't want the trade war with the United States. I think there are no winners in trade wars. I mean, yesterday I was here and watching the news as well, and you hear the news that consumer confidence in the United States is dropping. And, you know, if you have trade wars, it increases the prices, and in the end, the consumers will pay for this. So it is not, I mean, there are no winners in trade wars, and we don't want to start one. But of course, we will also protect our interests if a trade war is started against us.
You've been meeting with American lawmakers while you're in Washington. Do you get the sense that any of them are going to persuade President Trump to change his position on Russia?
There are strong supporters of Ukraine in, I mean, both sides of the aisle, and have been very, very much understanding what is going on. I don't know their relationship with President Trump, but I have seen the strong will that there is. Maybe this critical raw materials deal that President Trump is doing with President Zelensky will increase the economic interest of United States in Ukraine. That will in turn also give, I mean, the interest, security interest to protect those economic interests that you have in Ukraine. So maybe that is one of the tools.
So that critical minerals deal the U.S. and Ukraine are supposed to jointly invest in, it doesn't have any security guarantees for Ukraine.
It doesn't have, and I mean, we have been saying that you know, the security of Ukraine is also in the interest of United States, because as we have been saying, it's much broader than just Ukraine. And when you know, our American counterparts are talking about China, but at the same time saying that, you know, we can't step up to Russia. I mean, China is much bigger economy than Russia is, and much bigger army than Russia is. If you're saying that we can't step up to Russia, how can we, you know, really be able to step up to China then?
Mm-hmm. And before I let you go, I want to ask you about Iran. Europe will have to make a decision in the fall about what to do if Iran doesn't agree to hold diplomatic talks about its nuclear program. What is your sense of whether Iran is going to negotiate away its program?
We are going to have a next foreign affairs meeting, a foreign affairs ministers meeting, and we're going to discuss Iran, our common position, how we approach Iran. It is clear the way Iran operates. I mean, helping Russia in the war against Ukraine, but also their activities in the Middle East. That we have to have a much stronger stance when it comes to Iran, because developing a nuclear weapon, it's extremely dangerous. And there is one of the points where we need to cooperate with the United States as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time here today.
Prime Minister, in your audience tomorrow with the King, what is your message for him? And do you want him to speak out for Canadian sovereignty, whether that's in public or when he has his meeting with the President?
I look forward to sitting down with His Majesty tomorrow. As always, we will discuss matters of importance to Canada and to Canadians, and I can tell you that nothing seems more important to Canadians right now than standing up for our sovereignty and our independence as a nation.
And Prime Minister, what message did you have for Prime Minister Starmer? Did you ask him to speak up for Canadian sovereignty, and is it acceptable that he's taken a pass on that? I
can actually highlight that Prime Minister Starmer spoke during a PM question period last week, I believe, on how Canada is a strong and valued ally and partner, I know our allies will continue to be there to count on Canada and defend Canada in our strong sense of identity and independence.
The chances of nuclear war erupting in Europe have just skyrocketed. France has just suggested that it's willing to make a game-changing move that will see its nuclear weapons give Russian President Vladimir Putin something new to think about. And it's not just France. Germany is set to become a key part of a bold new move to create a powerful nuclear umbrella designed to protect all of Europe. The US is stunned. But what does France have up its sleeve? Why is it changing the way it uses its nuclear weapons? And what does the United States have to do with this brash new move? The initial news of France's plans comes in a February 24th report published by The Telegraph. It says that France is planning to deploy fighter jets armed with nuclear weapons to German military bases to provide Europe with a stronger nuclear shield. The move comes amidst a lot of change happening in Europe at the moment. Many on the continent are worried that US President Donald Trump is inching ever closer to withdrawing the 100,000 or so soldiers his country deploys in Europe. There are also big changes in Germany to consider. On February 23rd, Friedrich Merz won Germany's national elections. He's expected to become the country's new chancellor in the coming weeks, and he's calling on the rest of Europe to up its defense game. Putin is too much of a threat, Merz believes. The rest of Europe needs to show him that it can equal his threat. The Telegraph report leads us to several other questions, chief among them being why France is choosing to consider deploying nuclear weapons in other countries now. There are several potential answers to that question. First, this isn't an idea that's come out of the blue. The War Zone, or TWZ, points out that France has been discussing the possibility of creating a European nuclear umbrella with Germany for some time now. Merz has also been vocal in his support of a greater deterrent against Russia. France's President Emmanuel Macron met with soon-to-be German Chancellor before his February 24th meeting with Donald Trump at the White House. It's unknown exactly what took place during the discussion between Macron and Merz. There was probably some congratulating of Germany's incoming Chancellor involved. However, Macron likely travelled to speak with Merz because defence was on his mind. Merz seems to suggest as much. Before meeting with Macron, he said, "We need to have discussions with both the British and the French, the two European nuclear powers, about whether nuclear sharing or at least nuclear security from the United Kingdom and France could also apply to us." In other words, Merz is worried about Germany's future. The country doesn't have nuclear weapons of its own. That goes for every European country outside of the UK and France. The idea of sharing now is about ensuring Europe creates a stronger united front against what many see as a looming Russian threat. And that brings us to the second reason France is set to make its bold nuclear move. It wants to send a warning to Putin. Speaking to The Telegraph, an unnamed French official said, "Posting a few French nuclear jet fighters in Germany should not be difficult and would send a strong message. That message would be directed at Putin as a direct response to the many nuclear threats Russia's leader has made during his invasion of Ukraine." Since February 2022, Russia has placed its nuclear weapons on heightened alert, along with testing and deploying new nuclear capabilities, and threatening to resume nuclear testing, according to the UK's House of Commons. Putin also suspended Russia's participation in the 2010 New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, in 2023. That treaty, which Russia signed jointly with the United States, places a limit of 1,550 nuclear warheads on Moscow. That's 30% less than the 2,200 limit set in the previous SORT treaty. It also includes restrictions on how both the US and Russia can deploy and use their missiles, bombers, and nuclear weapon launchers. Now it's out of the window, at least temporarily, as Russia battles to overcome Ukraine. The biggest European concern related to Putin's nuclear threats came in November 2024. Putin chose that month to sign a decree updating Russia's formal nuclear doctrine. That decree, uncoincidentally, came immediately after the United States approved Ukraine's use of US-made long-range missiles on Russian territory. Among the changes to Russia's doctrine was language suggesting that Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons as a response to conventional weapons that it believes represent a critical threat to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, according to the Arms Control Association, or ACA. The policy also says that Russia may use its nukes if it receives reliable information about incoming ballistic missiles. In short, Russia gave itself the right to use nukes if its enemies used conventional weapons on its territory. Worse yet for Europe, language in the new doctrine suggests that the right to nuclear weapon usage extends to the allies of countries that supply Russia's enemies with those conventional weapons. That puts almost the entirety of Europe in Russia's nuclear crosshairs. The European Union, or EU, alone, of which Germany and France are members, has contributed almost $139 billion in aid to Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion. There's also another $120.8 billion waiting to be allocated. Most of this money has gone toward purchasing new weapons Ukraine is using right now to attack Russia, both in Ukraine and on Russia's territory. Based on these actions, the conditions for triggering Putin's new nuclear doctrine has already been met. France's bold move is a direct response to Putin's nuclear rhetoric. Yes, Russia has access to nuclear weapons and is threatening to use them. However, Europe isn't helpless on that front. By moving some of its nukes to Germany, France places them within closer range to Russia. If Putin launches a nuclear attack, France's latest move means that Europe is primed to respond. But why is France choosing to send this message now? We hinted at the reason earlier, which also brings us to the third answer as to why France has chosen now to make its move. Europe may not be able to rely on the US nuclear threat for much longer. The US is the only country in the world that comes close to matching Russia's nuclear threat when it comes to pure numbers. According to the ACA, the US has stockpiles of 5,225 nukes. Russia is a little ahead, it has 5,580 nuclear weapons. But the two are essentially equal when it comes to pure destructive force. That matters because the United States has long guaranteed Europe's safety by stationing a small collection of its nukes on the continent. The majority of those warheads are held at military bases in Germany, which is home to around 100 missiles. Therein lies the problem for Germany. In the past, it has essentially presented a nuclear threat to Russia by virtue of America's presence in the country. That threat was reinforced by America's membership in NATO. Article 5 of NATO's charter means every member of the organization is duty-bound to come to the defense of any other member nation that's attacked by another country. If Russia launched its nuclear weapons at Germany, France, or almost any other European nation, it would likely have been met with US nuclear missile strikes. Only that isn't guaranteed anymore. According to Newsweek, Trump is already planning to withdraw 20,000 of the 100,000 soldiers the US has stationed in Europe, cutting America's forces on the continent by a fifth. Trump's first stint as US president also saw him make numerous threats that he would withdraw the US from NATO. At the time, how much fellow NATO countries paid toward their own defense was Trump's big issue. Most weren't meeting NATO's 2% of gross domestic product, or GDP, guideline on spending, leading Trump to claim that the US was essentially paying for Europe's defense. Trump wasn't necessarily wrong with these claims, and though he's pulled back from his talk of quitting NATO in his second term as president, you have to believe that all of these threats play on Europe's collective mind. Many on the continent don't trust America's president. They worry that he might pull even more American troops out of Europe after the initial 20,000. If that happens, what does it mean for the US-made nuclear weapons stored in Germany? Do they stay where they are? The nukes fall under the NATO umbrella, but that might not mean much if Trump starts considering withdrawing the US from the collective defense organization again. France's move is a shock to the American system as much as it is to the Russian one. It's Europe's not-so-subtle way of telling Trump that the continent doesn't need him. The United States has also been making moves over the past few weeks that trigger alarm bells in European heads. On February 3rd, Trump hinted that he might follow up the 25% tariffs he's levying on Mexico and Canada with more tariffs aimed at the EU. He told the BBC that EU tariffs could happen pretty soon, adding, "They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing, and we take everything from them. Millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products." Implementing tariffs on the EU will be Trump's way of punishing Europe for not buying enough from the United States. It's also worth mentioning that the EU has condemned Trump's decision to levy tariffs against Mexico and Canada and says that it will respond firmly if it becomes a target. More signs of fractures between Europe and the US came on February 24th. On that date, the United Nations General Assembly, or UNGA, proposed a resolution calling for a comprehensive resolution to Russia's Ukraine invasion. The United States drafted its own resolution titled "The Path to Peace," that also called for an immediate end to the hostilities, while placing no blame on either side for starting the conflict. However, it was a UNGA resolution that contained strong language condemning Russia's actions that was the key talking point. The US voted against that resolution, which many saw as a refusal by Trump to condemn Putin for his Ukraine invasion. The US joined an interesting cast of countries with that decision. China, India, Iran, and Iraq all refused to vote on the resolution, which was actually a more moderate take on the conflict than that provided by the US. America was one of only 18 nations to vote against the resolution, with others including Russia, obviously, Israel, Sudan, Hungary, and Belarus. The latter two are among the few European nations that are unwilling to condemn Putin, likely because they hold close ties with Russia. From threats of NATO withdrawal to his refusal to condemn Putin, Trump seems to be sending a clear message to Europe. He's not on the continent's side, at least not as much as Europe expects him to be. And with these fractures creating the possibility that the US might withdraw its troops and nukes from Europe, the reasons behind France's bold move become clearer. It needs to send nuclear weapons to Germany to make up for the American nukes that Europe might lose. Of course, none of this is guaranteed. The US may not withdraw its nuclear weapons at all. However, France's decision indicates that many on the continent are now taking the need to protect themselves, with or without American involvement, far more seriously. That's the fourth answer to the "why now" question. France is planning on shipping nuclear weapons to Germany because it believes it's about time Europe started taking care of itself. Macron hinted at this during his joint interview with Trump at the White House on February 24th. In addition to interrupting Trump numerous times to correct him on various issues, such as how much Europe has collectively spent in Ukraine, Macron also called on Europe to do more to protect the continent. "I'm here as well after discussions with all my colleagues to say that Europe is willing to step up to be a stronger partner, to do more in defense and security for its continent, and to be engaged on trade, economy, and investments." Remember that Macron met with incoming German Chancellor Friedrich Merz before his press conference with Trump. Perhaps stepping up is Macron's subtle way of saying that nuclear weapons are coming to Germany. There are other signs that Europe is pulling itself away from its reliance on the US. Defense spending across Europe is on the rise, hitting an average 2.2% of GDP in 2024. Several European countries have already committed to going much further than that. The Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia plan to hit 5% of GDP spending on defense in 2025, with Poland not that far behind at 4.7% of GDP. There are also suggestions that Europe is quietly working on plans to send troops into Ukraine at some point in the future. Whether those troops will be a peacekeeping force or a united European army designed to deter Putin isn't clear. But what we can take from all of this is that France's bold move to send nuclear weapons into Germany is part of a wider plan. Europe is getting stronger. It has to, given the threat that Russia poses and the wildcard status of the US right now. The question now is simple: will France's nuclear weapons be enough? It's tough to gauge. On the surface, France is nowhere near Russia when it comes to the sheer volume of nuclear weapons it has at its disposal. We touched on this earlier with the ACA stats, suggesting that Russia has 5,580 nuclear weapons. France is a long way behind. It has 290 nukes in its military stockpile, with none of those weapons being strategically deployed. That means all 290 of France's warheads are currently assigned for potential use if the need arises, rather than already being ready to go on ballistic missiles and in bomber bases. Sending nuclear weapons to Germany may change all of that. We also have to consider how France's nukes will be used and what types they have available. TWZ provides some answers here. It says the majority of the nuclear weapons that would make their way to Germany would be mounted on Air Sol Moyen Portée A, or ASMP-A, missiles. These are supersonic land attack cruise missiles that are launched from fighter jets to hit targets on the ground. Each is capable of carrying a 440-pound payload. That payload can include TN-80 and TN-81 nuclear warheads, which each have 300 kiloton yields. For context, this is one of the most common sizes of nuclear weapons, with 300 kilotons being roughly equivalent to 300,000 tons of TNT. They're extremely dangerous nukes. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences says that a single 300 kiloton nuke would create a 1-mile wide fireball that reaches 200 million degrees at its center. Half a second after detonation, all streets and metal surfaces within 3/4 of a mile would dissolve. A massive blast wave would follow, generating winds of up to 750 miles per hour that crush buildings and send vehicles flying. 3 miles away from the blast zone, the clothes on people's backs would burst into flames, with any exposed skin suffering immediate third-degree burns. Ultimately, the wide area fire generated by just one of these nukes would have a radius of up to 4.5 miles and would destroy an entire area of up to 65 square miles, more than enough to devastate almost any Russian city. The ASMP-A missile, used to send these nuclear warheads to their destinations, is also capable of traveling up to 310 miles. That's not an especially long range. The distance between Berlin and Moscow is about 1,000 miles, meaning France couldn't just launch its nukes from the safety of German territory. It would need the second part of the package it's planning to send, the Dassault Rafale. France's main multi-role fighter is capable of reaching a top speed of 863 miles per hour, though its approach speed drops to a little under 140 miles per hour. It has a 50,000-foot service ceiling and a combat range of up to 1,150 miles. That's enough to get the jet from Berlin to Moscow, though not quite enough to secure its safe passage back. TWZ says that France and Germany would likely use aerial tankers, which are massive aircraft used to refuel other planes while they're in the air, to ensure the Rafales can make their dangerous journeys before returning to base. Better yet, none of France's nuclear weapons fall under the NATO banner. The ASMP-A is a sovereign capability, says TWZ, which means it isn't part of the dual-key arrangement that led to the US supplying its B-61 nuclear warheads to Europe. France can do whatever it pleases with its nukes in terms of deploying and using them without worrying about NATO's guidelines. That's good news for Europe. However, there's another wild card within France's bold nuclear plan that we haven't discussed yet, the United Kingdom. Will it get involved and also supply Germany with nuclear weapons to use as a frontline deterrent against Putin? It would be a powerful ally if it did. The UK has 225 nukes in its military stockpiles, which would almost double Europe's deterrent against Russia. The country's Trident warheads can also be launched from submarines, which delivers a second option in terms of how Europe could attack Russia. However, the UK hasn't confirmed anything yet. There are signs that it might be willing to join France in contributing to Europe's new nuclear shield, though. During a visit to Kyiv on Monday, former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson claimed that there was a moral case for Ukraine to have its own nuclear weapons. Current Prime Minister Keir Starmer also sided with European leaders ahead of Trump in calling for a resolution to the war. The UK was among the nations that signed the UN resolution that the US voted against. Plus, Britain has indicated a desire to sign a defence and security pact with the EU, which will be vital given that the UK is no longer part of that collective. France's move may be designed to get the UK involved too. An unnamed diplomat who spoke to The Telegraph says if the French move to place a nuclear deterrent in Germany, it would indeed increase pressure on the Brits to follow suit. My understanding is that on the CDU, or Counter-Disinformation Unit side, the thinking is that we need a nuclear umbrella. We want to have a say in this, we should be ready to talk about this, and we are willing to pay for it. The caveat to that claim is that the US would have to withdraw its nukes from Germany first before the UK sends any from its stockpile, says the diplomat. Perhaps that's the case for France's plan too. The Telegraph notes that it's unknown just how serious the discussions about moving French nuclear weapons to Germany are. Talks may be in their early stages. It may also be months or even years before we see any movement. So much seems to depend on what the US does with its nukes. One thing is for certain. Putin can't rely on the US pulling its nukes to minimize the threat Europe poses to his imperialistic ambitions anymore. France is willing to replace those nuclear weapons with warheads of its own, showing Putin and Trump that Europe is taking what happens on its continent very seriously. If Ukraine falls, NATO will burn. That's the dire warning Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky delivered during an interview at the Munich Security Conference. His message was simple: Putin won't stop at Ukraine. He'll target the rest of Europe next, and he may even be able to do it without the United States getting involved. Putin is waiting for NATO to be weakened, and Russia's leader cannot be trusted. But why does Zelensky think that Russia wants a war against NATO? What would allow that war to happen? And what would the outcome of that war actually be? We start with Zelensky's comments. As Ukraine's president spoke to reporters in Munich, he pointed out that US President Donald Trump has the leverage to push Putin towards ceasefire negotiations. However, Putin can't be trusted. Even if he comes to the table with Ukraine involved, he still has expansionist desires, and he might break the conditions of a truce at a moment's notice. If that happens, it will be a sign that Putin isn't ready to stop at Ukraine. The rest of Europe, which accounts for most of NATO, will be next. We believe that Putin will wage war against NATO, Zelensky told the reporters. In addition to suggesting that Russia's leader is waiting for a weakened NATO. How could NATO be weakened? By the possibility that the United States of America will think to take its military from Europe. Zelensky's warning is twofold. Europe can't trust Putin to keep his word, and it can't rely on the United States to come to its rescue should Putin look beyond Ukraine. I don't know if they will want 30% of Europe, 50%, I don't know. Nobody knows, but they will have this possibility, said Ukraine's leader when referring to a situation in which Ukraine falls and the United States isn't around to help. The words echoed those Zelensky spoke at the Munich Security Conference itself, where he told Europe's leaders that we can't rule out the possibility that America might say no to Europe on issues that threaten it. So it appears that we have two conditions that must be met if Russia is to wage war on NATO. First, the US must either withdraw from the alliance or refuse to aid its NATO partners, even if a Russian invasion triggers Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Second, Putin must have the desire to claim more of Europe if he's successful in Ukraine. The question now is simple: could those two conditions be met? The short answer is yes. It's a possibility that Russia could wage war on Europe and the US wouldn't intervene. Starting with the weakening of NATO, the concept of Trump removing the US from the coalition is far from new. Back in 2018, during Trump's first stint as US president, Trump reportedly told senior administration officials several times that he desired the removal of the US from NATO. Those statements included claims that Trump didn't see the point of maintaining such a large military alliance, especially as he believed that the existence of NATO was a drain on America's resources. A year before, Trump had also started telling NATO members that it was time to pay their way. During a NATO meeting in Brussels, he said that massive amounts of money were owed to the US by the other members of the coalition, while pointing out that many of NATO's members fall well short of the defense spending of 2% of gross domestic product, or GDP, that NATO recommends. And he was right. In 2017, only 4 nations were meeting what Trump believed was an obligation more than a recommendation. Those countries were Estonia, which spent 2.01% of its GDP on defense, Greece, with 2.38%, the UK, which spent 2.06%, and of course, the United States as the highest spender at 3.31%. At the time, NATO had 29 members, meaning less than 14% of its members were hitting the 2% recommendation. Trump's argument at the time seemed fairly simple: pay up or the US is gone. NATO has changed its tack. Fast forward to 2024 and NATO has expanded to include 32 members. Of those members, 23 are hitting the target of at least 2% of GDP spending on their defense. It's not a perfect record. Around 2/3 of NATO allies are hitting the target, but that's a lot better than the 14% or so of 2017, which would suggest that Trump was getting his way. America's NATO allies were starting to spend at similar levels, at least in terms of GDP, as the United States. The problem for Europe, and the reason why Zelensky is warning that Russia is preparing to wage war on NATO, is that Trump may not have changed his views on the US leaving the alliance. On February 14th, the UK Defense Journal reported on comments made by former US National Security Advisor John Bolton, who served under Trump during his first presidential term. He suggests that Trump is now moving the goalpost to keep the door open for the removal of the US from NATO. First, he said back in his initial term, well, all these Europeans are not spending 2% of GDP on defense. Now he's saying you need to spend 5% of GDP on defense, Bolton said. He's referring to comments made by Trump in early January 2025, when America's president claimed that NATO should have a 5% target. They can all afford it, said Trump, but they should be at 5%, not 2%. Note that Trump didn't say "we" here. He talked about NATO as a separate entity from the United States, acting as though all the other members should hit a new 5% target from which America is immune. The US also doesn't spend 5% of its GDP on defense either, with the country hitting 3.4% of GDP expenditure in 2024. That puts it about level with Estonia, also at 3.4% and quite a way behind Poland, which spent 4.1% of its GDP on its military. Bolton actually agrees with Trump's comments to an extent. He says that he believes the US itself isn't spending enough in a challenging world. However, he also points out that Trump's call for 5% may be an interesting goal. I suspect there's almost no country in Europe, maybe the Baltics and Poland and a few others, that will go to 5%. So in a year when it doesn't happen, Trump will be able to say, NATO is just as worthless as I always said it was, I'm getting out. In other words, Trump has moved the spending goalpost now so that more European NATO members are hitting the 2% target, and he's doing it because he sees it as a route for pulling the US out of the alliance. There's only one potential saving grace for NATO's European members. The US Congress stands as the guardrail that keeps America in the coalition. Any decision to leave has to first pass through Congress before it can be made a reality. Former US President Joe Biden signed that requirement into law as part of the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, which may have been Biden's subtle way of preparing for the possibility of a Trump presidency. The problem is that the law isn't airtight. This is not open and shut, claims Brookings Institution scholar and senior editor of Lawfare Scott Anderson. This is about Congress telling you that you can't do this, and if you ignore Congress, you're going to have to fight us in the courts over it, he says. Therein lies the problem. For the issue to be litigated, Anderson claims, there needs to be someone with standing to sue. That someone could be Congress, only it's not clear if the Republicans in Congress will be willing to launch a lawsuit against their own elected president. So Zelensky is right to worry about NATO no longer having the US as a partner. Trump has threatened withdrawal in the past. He's moving the spending goalpost to a level that may be unreachable for many of the alliance's members. Plus, the laws in place to force congressional approval of a withdrawal aren't as solid as they need to be. But what about Putin? With NATO weakened by a US withdrawal, would he really set his sights on the rest of Europe? Again, it's a possibility. Suggestions that Putin's appetite for expansion may extend beyond Ukraine have existed since at least February 2023. That's when RAND published an article where it claimed that Putin's next goal may be to attack other post-Soviet neighbors who were previously part of Russia's empire. And Putin has a history in that respect. He invaded Georgia in 2008, soon after then Prime Minister Putin had told former US President George W. Bush that Ukraine is not even a country. Of course, Putin invaded Crimea in 2014, following that up with his special military operation against Ukraine in 2022. In the same year, he also claimed that Kazakhs never had statehood, but perhaps his most worrying claim came in 2016. Russia's president said that his country's border had no end. In May 2024, Philip Reeves of NPR's Morning Edition noted that many in Estonia fear Putin could target them next if he's victorious in Ukraine. Putin could seek to test NATO and Article 5 by entering the Baltics despite the risk of triggering nuclear war, claimed Reeves, noting that Estonians were protesting Putin's war in Ukraine outside the Russian embassy in Estonia's Tallinn at the time. It's also notable that about a quarter of Estonia's population are ethnic Russians, which could serve as ammunition for a future Putin claim that Estonia should be part of his country. The Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies also notes that Putin may be so hell-bent on expansion that he would invade European NATO nations even if the US remains part of the alliance. No one knows what Putin would do next if he were emboldened by a victory against Ukraine. And although analysts downplay the possibility of Putin attacking a Baltic state such as Estonia, Putin has surprised the world before. He did so when he invaded Ukraine. Worse yet, according to the Institute, Putin both dislikes NATO and doesn't fear an attack from the alliance. Rather, he's frustrated that NATO constrains him and prevents him from restoring what he sees as the true Russia. He's already engaged in hybrid warfare with many NATO countries, including using disinformation campaigns, sabotage, and cyber attacks to get his way. Would he go a step further and use military force? Perhaps if Russia defeats Ukraine and has a couple of years to rebuild its military capabilities, and if Trump has pulled the US out of NATO by then, the possibility of Putin following through on his expansionist desires becomes much higher. Ukraine certainly thinks that's a possibility. In October 2023, President Zelensky said that Putin is considering various scenarios for the coming years while highlighting 2028 as the potential year that Putin will attack a NATO-aligned nation. If Russia is allowed to adapt now, said Zelensky, then in 2028 the Kremlin will be able to restore the military potential Ukraine has destroyed, and Russia will have enough power to attack the countries that are the focus of Russian expansion. Like many before him, Zelensky highlighted the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as being particularly at risk. This is clear information from our intelligence, and we signal it to you, Zelensky concluded. There's also the Trump factor to consider in all of this. Beyond the possibility that Trump may pull the US out of NATO, America's president has been sending some decidedly mixed messages to Ukraine over the last few weeks. Ukraine's president has had conversations with Trump during which he warned the US president that Putin is a liar. Putin doesn't want any peace, Zelensky told Trump. Ukraine's president also believes that Putin is a little bit scared of Trump, with that fear being potential leverage Trump could use to push Putin toward peace negotiations. The Kyiv Post also points out that US officials have assured Ukraine that America won't simply wash its hands of Ukraine's plight after it's spent 3 years battling against Russia. All of these seem like pro-Trump and pro-Ukraine messages, but on February 18th, Trump also held supposed peace talks with Putin in Saudi Arabia without any Ukrainian involvement. To Ukraine, that would look like the US attempting to cut them out of any deal that's being made, running contrary to the previous claims that America won't leave Ukraine behind. Trump was even quoted as being disappointed by Ukraine's reaction of surprise to not being invited to the talks, with Trump also saying that Zelensky could have made a deal earlier in the conflict. I hear that they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Trump even appeared to blame Ukraine for the conflict, adding, "You should have never started it. You could have made a deal." Is it any wonder that Zelensky is now warning NATO's European members that they face an imminent threat? Many believe that Putin wants to invade the Baltic states next, with Ukraine's own intelligence suggesting as much. Trump is sending mixed messages to Zelensky, and there's still the possibility that the US will withdraw from NATO to consider. If that happens, NATO's nuclear threat diminishes enormously, leaving only France and Britain as the nations capable of striking Russia with nukes, which would further open the door for a Russian war against what remains of NATO. The question now is simple: is NATO ready for that war? It depends on who you ask. In June 2024, the UK Defence Journal stacked NATO without the US against Russia in an in-depth analysis. It pointed out that the combined strength of NATO's members without the US is far higher than Ukraine's when Russia invaded in February 2022. On the personnel front, NATO without America has 1.5 million active military personnel, which matches up well with the 1.32 million active soldiers Russia currently has. It's also worth noting that Russia has churned through over 862,000 troops in Ukraine, leaving it with a military predominantly made up of inexperienced conscripts, contract mercenaries, and even soldiers from other countries such as North Korea. NATO also has access to more advanced technology than Russia, the journal argues. Europe's NATO members have invested heavily in next-generation aircraft, cyber defenses, and precision-guided munitions, all of which make the collective a viable and powerful foe for Russia to take on. Of course, this also assumes that these NATO members will all respond with military force should Putin attack another NATO member, such as one of the Baltic states. However, this version of NATO would also miss the US dramatically. Its nuclear threat will be cut down, with France and Britain combining to have 515 nuclear warheads, compared to Russia's 1,549 strategic nukes and its remaining stockpile of 4,380. If Putin reaches for the nuclear button, he could devastate all NATO nations at once. France and Britain could do the same to Russia, though with less firepower than it would have if the US brought its 5,225 nuclear warheads to the engagement. European NATO also relies heavily on the US for operational intelligence and missile defense. Plus, America's large stockpile of aerial tankers would be missed, as these important aircraft are in short supply in Europe and would prove vital for keeping NATO's more powerful aerial forces refueled for assaults against Russia. The journal's conclusion is that NATO without the US could fend off a Russian attack well during the first few months, causing massive damage to Putin's forces. But what happens months down the line when Russia is still coming and NATO has depleted a large portion of its munitions? A February 2025 examination of the same topic by UK Defence Journal mentions the same issues. Again, the conclusion is that European NATO, and the continent as a whole, could mount a robust defence against Putin's forces. However, sustaining operations beyond the opening phases of such a war would see this America-less version of NATO struggle without the intelligence, logistical, and technical support the US has long provided. The NATO members that would be on the front lines in a war against Russia are even less confident. In December 2024, leaders from Latvia, Estonia, and Finland all made the same claim that NATO is not ready to fight against Russia without US involvement. "That's absolutely clear," said Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs. "We can't keep simply hoping for a situation where the US remains much involved in Europe." Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal added, "We have to ramp up our defense capabilities because of Russia's threat and its inability to be a democracy and operate in a rule-based world." It's worth noting that Estonia and Latvia spent 3.4% and 3.15% of their GDP on defense as of 2024. Finland has also broken through NATO's 2% target, spending 2.4% of its GDP. Those European NATO nations are taking the Russian threat seriously. Perhaps the problem is that the rest of NATO isn't doing the same. And it's that discoordination between NATO's European members that could be the alliance's undoing if Trump withdraws the US from the coalition. European NATO has the numbers and equipment to match Russia. However, if it gets bogged down in bureaucracy and debates on how to react to a Russian victory against Ukraine, it could leave itself open to being caught out. That's why NATO might burn if Ukraine falls, as Zelensky claims. So what's the solution? Ukraine's president believes he has one: the formation of a new European army. "I really believe that time has come. The armed forces of Europe must be created," Zelensky said to journalists outside the Munich Security Conference. Ukraine's president has pushed for this sort of unified European force for several years, with little progress. He also isn't clear on what the force would look like, which only adds to the challenge NATO's European members face. Royal United Service Institute Director Matthew Saville suggests that establishing a land deterrence force of 100,000 to 150,000 soldiers could effectively respond to any renewed Russian aggression, particularly if a ceasefire in Ukraine is reached. However, without US involvement, Saville believes it would be challenging to persuade nations distant from Russia's borders to commit such significant troop numbers, potentially compromising their own defenses. Alternatively, Saville proposes the formation of a tripwire force, smaller than the full deterrence force but still comprising tens of thousands of European troops stationed along critical front lines. This contingent would serve as a rapid response unit, deterring further Russian advances and ensuring that any attack would trigger a broader European military reaction. Then we have former NATO advisor Jamie Shea acknowledging the difficulties Europe faces in assembling such forces, but emphasizes their necessity to contain Russia's threat within Ukraine. He advocates for an active force of 50,000 soldiers operating in seamless rotations, requiring a total commitment of 150,000 troops to maintain a continuous deterrent presence. None of these proposals consider the possibility of European NATO starting a full-blown war against Putin over what he's done in Ukraine. It's all about deterrence, with numbers that are significantly lower than the 1.5 million troops the combined European NATO forces could bring to a fight. And there's also conflict among Europe's NATO members to consider. France, the UK and Sweden have all indicated a willingness to send troops to the front lines if necessary. However, with the recent election of Friedrich Merz as Germany's Chancellor on February 23, 2025, there is a potential shift in Germany's stance. Merz has emphasized the need for Europe to strengthen its own defense capabilities, expressing doubts about NATO's future in its current form. This could lead to a more proactive German role in European defense initiatives, but will that be enough? If European NATO isn't united against Putin, as is the case right now, then Zelensky might be right. NATO might burn, especially without US involvement, and it would lose a war with Russia not because it doesn't have the soldiers or the equipment, but because of the combined issues of a lack of cooperation and the loss of America's supporting intelligence and logistics. Russia once boasted one of the most powerful navies in the world, a force that struck fear across the oceans. And Ukraine, they practically didn't even have a navy. But fast forward to today, and Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been sent packing, retreating from Crimea with its tail between its legs. And the best part, Ukraine pulled this off with a weapon so unexpected, it sounds like it was designed for a Saturday morning cartoon. The Sea Baby. That's right, not some menacing Baba Yaga drone that soldiers believe can snatch them right off the battlefield, or a missile system called Thunder that rumbles with power and destruction. A Sea Baby. But trust us, this baby is anything but sweet. This naval drone has been terrorizing Russia's once dominant fleet, proving that sometimes the deadliest punch comes from the smallest fist. And after all, doesn't that summarize Ukraine's entire strategy? Who needs thunder when you've got a sea baby bringing the storm? Here's everything you need to know about this weapon whose cutesy name hasn't prevented it from handing Russia its biggest maritime humiliation. When they hear the word drone, most people picture a small, buzzing quadcopter hovering in the sky. But that's not what the Sea Baby is. The Sea Baby is a fully fledged vehicle, a maritime weapon designed to glide across the water like a ghost. Officially called an uncrewed surface vehicle, or USV for short, this multi-purpose maritime drone was developed specifically for the war with Russia. The idea for unmanned attack boats came in 2022 from Lukashevich Ivan Volodymyrovich, a brigadier general in the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU. The initial concept took shape in July 2022 through collaboration with the Ukrainian Navy and private companies. However, as the war escalated, the SBU took matters into its own hands. This decision led to the creation of the Sea Baby, a naval drone designed for heavier payloads and meant to target static vessels, such as ships docked in ports. In this regard, the Sea Baby was an entirely unique concept. These drones aren't the result of foreign partnerships or outside assistance. As Vasyl Malyuk, the head of the SBU, explained to CNN, sea surface drones are a unique invention of the Security Service of Ukraine, and they did it all alone. As Malyuk pointed out, none of the private companies are involved. This is all homegrown, developed by Ukrainian people for Ukrainian people. And believe it or not, a large portion of Sea Babies have even been funded by Ukrainian people, crowdfunded at that. In a stunning display of national unity and resolve, a Ukrainian crowdfunding campaign raised $7.77 million in just 36 hours to produce 35 Sea Baby drones. That's the equivalent of one Sea Baby every hour. And the crowdfunding campaign is still ongoing. United24, Ukraine's official fundraising platform, is even offering to name one of the Sea Babies for the person who donates the entire amount for one unit, $221,000. These innovative drones are produced in secret underground facilities in Ukraine, a symbol of the country's resilience under pressure. But these facilities have seen several iterations of Sea Babies. The first operational Sea Baby models were developed by May 2023. These early versions carried payloads of up to 238 pounds and were primarily used for kamikaze-style attacks. As the drones began making their mark, the SBU quickly identified areas of improvement, initiating a series of upgrades. Late 2023 saw a significant leap in the Sea Baby's capabilities. The drones were upgraded to carry explosive warheads up to 1,874 pounds, vastly increasing their destructive power. Multiple communication systems were also added. Though redundant, these systems were added to prevent issues like the ones experienced earlier that year when connectivity to Starlink in Crimea was denied, leaving several drones stranded during an attempted strike on Russia's frigate Admiral Makarov in Sevastopol. These upgrades ensured that the Sea Babies could operate autonomously, even in contested communication environments. By the end of 2023, the Sea Baby had evolved into a multi-purpose platform capable of carrying various pieces of specialized equipment. This transformation turned this drone from a simple attack vehicle into a versatile weapon system capable of adapting to different missions. In January 2024, the SBU unveiled a new variant equipped with 6 thermobaric launchers, further cementing the drone's reputation as a game-changing weapon. The Sea Baby's development continued into 2024. In May, the SBU revealed an updated model named Avdiivka, made possible by the large-scale fundraising effort we discussed earlier. The latest iteration showcased the ongoing commitment to innovation and adaptation that has defined Sea Baby's journey from concept to battlefield dominance. But what exactly is Ukraine working on at the moment? It's working on a marvel of engineering and a nightmare for its enemies. Dubbed the Sea Baby 2024, this upgraded maritime drone is a deadly blend of power, speed, and stealth. Measuring nearly 20 feet in length and 6.6 feet in width, this sleek vessel has a height of almost 2 feet above the waterline. This makes it incredibly difficult to spot. Plus, it doesn't help Ukraine's enemies that its hull is constructed from a special radar-resistant material, which allows it to glide undetected over the waves. And thanks to a 400-horsepower engine, this drone is moving along at blistering speeds of 56 miles per hour. But speed and stealth are just part of the equation. The Sea Baby is capable of carrying nearly a full ton of explosives over a range of 620 miles. This impressive range and payload capacity mean that the Sea Baby can strike targets far beyond enemy lines, delivering devastating blows to high-value naval assets and coastal installations. And it can do so in a calm sea or a raging storm, making it a relentless predator, a predator jam-packed with weapons. As mentioned, the Sea Baby can carry explosives for kamikaze-style attacks. However, it can also be equipped with a variety of other weapons. Here's how the Swiss Army knife of the water went from a simple but devastating kamikaze drone to Russia's greatest nightmare. Even while it was a kamikaze drone only, the Sea Baby's raw destructive force was enough to shake the Russian Navy to its core. However, in time, Russia adapted, tightening the defenses around its naval bases with armed Mi-8 helicopters and Raptor patrol boats. Ukraine then realized that the Sea Baby needed more than stealth and explosive payloads. It also had to fight its way to the target. And so the first weapons upgrades began. The Sea Baby was first armed with RPG-16 thermobaric rockets, unguided but devastating, with a range of 3,280 feet. This allowed the drones to deliver fiery destruction from a distance, clearing paths for target defenses before reaching their primary objectives. Early designs carried 2, 4, or 6 of these rockets, adding a terrifying new dimension to the Sea Baby's capabilities. As its battlefield role evolved, the Sea Baby was soon outfitted with even more sophisticated weaponry. In one upgrade, it began deploying 122mm Grad rockets capable of bombarding large coastal installations or troop concentrations. The use of Grad rockets proved particularly effective in recent engagements, showing the drone's ability to deliver area effect devastation from the sea. And Ukraine's innovation didn't stop there. The Sea Baby became a true multi-purpose platform when it was equipped with heavy machine guns. But these weren't ordinary guns. They came with advanced targeting systems that included automatic guidance and auto-capture capabilities, allowing drones to engage aerial threats like helicopters and fighter jets. Each of these upgrades tells a story of adaptation. Each gave the Sea Baby teeth. Now every wave that hides a Sea Baby also carries a host of surprises: rockets, machine guns, and even surface-to-air capabilities. It's no longer just a kamikaze drone. It's a warship in miniature. And now it's starting to make sense how Ukraine is blowing Russia back to hell with this weapon, right? The Sea Baby isn't just hitting targets, it's rewriting the rules of naval warfare. And as the smoke clears, one thing becomes evident. Ukraine has weaponized ingenuity to systematically dismantle Russia's mightiest strongholds. Let's start with the Black Sea Fleet as a whole. Once a formidable force in the heart of Russia's naval power, this fleet is now reeling from an onslaught of Ukrainian drone strikes. But the significance of these strikes stretches far beyond military might. You see, the Black Sea Fleet controls a vital waterway, crucial for global grain exports and Russia's access to strategic resources like oil from the Sea of Azov. As for Ukraine, the Black Sea is vital for Ukraine's agricultural exports, especially after Russia's blockade. Its ability to safeguard the passage of goods from its ports, particularly Odessa, has been at the core of Ukraine's military strategy. The Sea Baby is now playing a vital role in ensuring that the Black Sea Fleet can't maintain its grip on this region by forcing the Russian Navy into retreat. Ukraine's relentless strikes, especially on key locations like Sevastopol, have crippled Russia's naval capabilities and disrupted its operations in the Black Sea. They've been essentially starving Russia's war machine by cutting off access to vital ports. Ukrainian drones, including the Sea Babies, have caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to the Russian fleet, with some estimates suggesting as much as $500 million worth of losses. The Sea Baby alone has become an unstoppable force, but it's also part of a broader strategy involving a wide array of drones. After all, the Russo-Ukrainian war has become known as a drone war for a reason. In the naval department, the Ukrainian Magura V5 has also proven valuable. These drones have been integral to Ukraine's ability to hit Russian warships, even adapting to carry Soviet air-to-air missiles. Together with the Sea Baby, they have torn through the Black Sea Fleet's defenses, delivering punishing blows that have effectively put Russian naval assets on the back foot. Like the Sea Baby, the Magura V5 is a product of Ukraine's innovation in unmanned surface vessels. However, this drone is operated by a different agency, the Main Directorate of Intelligence, or GUR for short. While the Sea Baby was developed by the SBU to target more stationary, high-value assets, the Magura V5 is used by GUR for a more dynamic role. This is made possible by its smaller and more maneuverable design that allows swift strikes against warships at sea. However, the Sea Baby has been hitting Russian warships like a wrecking ball as well. In October 2022, a coordinated strike saw Ukrainian drones hit multiple Russian ships in Sevastopol Bay, including the Admiral Makarov and Admiral Essen frigates. Throw in the Ivan Golubat's minesweeper and Ladny patrol ship, and suddenly Russia's Black Sea Fleet is looking a lot smaller. And this wasn't a fluke either. On September 14, 2023, the Sea Baby scored a direct hit on the Russian corvette Samum, leaving the ship noticeably listing as it was towed away for repairs. Talk about making a splash. A month later, in October 2023, the Pavel Derzavin patrol ship got its turn. Boom! Damaged by another Sea Baby strike, proving these drones aren't just for show. And then in October 2023, the Vladimir Kozitsky, a reconnaissance ship, joined the growing list of casualties. But let's not forget the big-ticket strikes. The Sea Babies were also instrumental in blowing up the Crimean Bridge, a major symbol of Russia's illegal annexation. Since the annexation in 2014, Moscow has controlled key assets around the Crimean Peninsula, and since the 2022 invasion, Kyiv has made it its mission to consistently attack those assets. The message was clear: the fight for Crimea isn't over. And with the help of Sea Baby drones, Kyiv is proving that no Russian stronghold, not even the infamous Crimean Bridge, is beyond reach. On July 17, 2023, the Sea Baby drones made headlines around the world when they carried out a daring attack on the bridge, the vital supply line connecting mainland Russia to Crimea. With up to 1,874 pounds of explosives on board, 2 Sea Baby drones struck the bridge's road and railway sections, causing significant damage. This wasn't the first time Ukraine had targeted the bridge, but it was the second successful attack on what Russia once touted as an indestructible symbol of its grip on Crimea. The explosion sent shockwaves through Russian forces, and while tragically causing civilian casualties, the operation also made one thing abundantly clear: Ukraine is capable of reaching deep into Russia's strategic infrastructure. Also, Kyiv's innovative use of drones like the Sea Baby will remain a pivotal weapon in their arsenal, striking at the heart of Russia's ambitions in Crimea and beyond. This also includes Russian-controlled gas platforms off the coast of Crimea. In December 2024, the Ukrainian Navy released footage showing the Sea Babies targeting Russian-held gas facilities in the Black Sea, delivering explosive payloads that left at least one platform engulfed in flames. In a statement following the attack, the Ukrainian Navy declared, "The hunt for the enemy in the Black Sea continues," emphasizing that these strategic strikes were part of a broader campaign to weaken Russia's military presence in the region. The video, while unverified, captured a series of strikes on gas platforms where Ukrainian drones targeted enemy surveillance systems and other critical infrastructure. The Ukrainian Navy's message was once again clear: Russia's occupation of Crimea and its surrounding waters wouldn't go unchallenged. The attack on the gas platforms marks a new chapter in Ukraine's fight to wrest control of its waters from Russia. With each successful strike, Ukraine demonstrates not just its military prowess, but its commitment to pushing Russian forces out of its territory, one drone at a time. Recently, the Sea Babies have even gone head-to-head with Russian aircraft. In an operation conducted in the early hours of December 6, 2024, Ukraine demonstrated just how far its drone capabilities have evolved. The Sea Babies, now equipped with mounted .50 caliber machine guns, proved more than capable of fending off Russian helicopters, aircraft, and patrol boats attempting to intercept them. Ukrainian forces revealed that these drones inflicted significant damage on several Russian helicopters and boats, turning the tables on what Russia had expected to be an easy hunt. Intercepted Russian radio communications confirmed that the drones caused notable casualties among Russian crews, while their aircraft suffered significant damage, requiring extensive repairs. These attacks were a powerful reminder of the Sea Babies' versatility and effectiveness. The drones didn't stop at just taking down aircraft. They also targeted a barge transporting military equipment meant for repairing the Crimean Bridge. It seems Ukraine is determined for that bridge to remain a problem for Russia, no matter how hard it tries to fix or protect it. And as things stand, the Sea Babies are also poised to remain a problem for Russia. However, their use in Ukraine's ongoing conflict with Russia is no surprise. From the onset of the invasion, both sides have turned to unmanned vehicles as integral parts of their arsenals. However, Ukraine has stood out for its highly innovative use of drones across various domains, air, land, and sea. The Ukrainian military, along with intelligence and security services, have deployed a range of drones, from inexpensive, hobbyist-style aerial drones fitted with explosives to more advanced underwater drones like the Marichka. These devices have been pivotal in taking out Russian targets, often at a fraction of the cost of the equipment they destroy. In fact, Ukraine's drone usage has been so notable that it sank over a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet without any substantial naval assets. But Ukraine's ingenuity isn't stopping with the drones already in use. In a remarkable move, President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree in February 2024 to establish the Unmanned Systems Forces, a dedicated branch within the Ukrainian armed forces to further harness the power of drones. This new unit will focus on developing specialized staff, scaling drone production, and refining tactics for their use in all domains, land, air, and sea. From this initiative alone, it's obvious that drones are no longer just a tool for Ukraine. They are becoming the backbone of the country's military operations, helping to reshape the battlefield. As Zelensky explains, drones are now tasked with repelling assaults, destroying Russian equipment, and even neutralizing key infrastructure. But Russia isn't exactly sitting idly by. The country has been actively countering Ukraine's drone attacks, including the Sea Baby drones, with a range of defenses. These include intercepting waterborne and airborne drones. On October 23, 2024, for instance, Russia claimed to have destroyed 4 Ukrainian sea drones targeting the Crimean Peninsula. In addition, the Russian air defenses were engaged, reportedly destroying 10 airborne drones over Crimea. But Ukraine has been so persistent that Russia deemed fleeing better than fighting in many instances. To protect its assets, the country has relocated naval forces from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk and set up a new base in Abkhazia. Additionally, it started using decoys and large-caliber machine guns on vessels to mislead drones. Russia also increased patrols with Mi-8 helicopters and Raptor boats. And yet the threat persists. Sea Baby's compact size, speed, and psychological impact on Russian naval crew members continue to make it an elusive target, forcing Russia's military to constantly scramble and rethink their defenses. Each time these forces believe they've found a solution, the Sea Babies show them otherwise. With every strike, these drones make clear that Ukraine isn't going to let up anytime soon, turning the Black Sea into a high-stakes game where Russia is always one step behind. Putin won't stop at just Ukraine. Whether it's to resurrect his vision of the Russian Empire or to punish those who've stood firmly by Ukraine, many experts predict he'll push further into Europe. And it's not just analysts sounding the alarm. The potential targets know this threat all too well. Germany is one of them, and it's at the top of Putin's list of potential targets. So we have to ask, what would happen if Putin attacked Germany? Or perhaps more fittingly, when Putin attacks Germany? And we're not the only ones asking this. The German public broadcaster Bayerischer Rundfunk is also concerned. That's why they sat down for an interview with Lieutenant General André Bodemann on their online platform, BR24. Before diving into his insights, let's take a moment to understand who Bodemann is and why his perspective carries weight in this conversation. Lieutenant General Andrei Bodeman is a highly decorated, seasoned military leader with decades of experience in the German army. Currently serving as the commander of the Bundeswehr's Territorial Command, he oversees national defense operations and homeland security tasks, ensuring the protection of German soil. Bodeman's extensive background includes leadership roles in key NATO missions, including operations in Kosovo and Afghanistan, and significant experience in the Federal Ministry of Defense. With a career spanning from platoon leader to his current post as a lieutenant general, his deep understanding of military strategy and his hands-on experience in some of the most challenging geopolitical landscapes make him an expert on the threats Europe faces today. And today there's no greater threat to Europe's security than Russia, something Bodeman knows all too well. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Germany has been an unwavering supporter of the resisting nation. 3 years into the invasion, the country has committed an astounding $29 billion in military aid to Ukraine. This includes funding for security capacity building and the provision of military equipment from both industry and Germany's own armed forces stocks. In 2024 alone, Germany allocated approximately $7.3 billion to support Ukraine's defense efforts, with an additional $6.2 billion in commitments for the coming years. This isn't surprising given Germany's previous track record. By the end of 2023, the country had already spent around $5.2 billion, with another $1.66 billion spent in 2022. In addition, over 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been trained in Germany at a cost of around $292 million. In the grand scheme of things, Germany ranks as the second largest individual donor, just behind the United States. In Europe, it's only outpaced by the collective contributions from the EU. Germany's commitment to Ukraine is not just significant, it's a defining stance against Russian aggression. Interestingly, Bodeman doesn't directly cite Germany's robust aid to Ukraine as the reason Putin might set his sights on the country. Instead, he highlights the critical geostrategic role Germany plays in Europe. As Bodeman puts it, Germany is right in the heart of Europe. This central position carries significant implications for the continent's defense. If Russia were to push further into NATO territory, especially on the eastern flank, Germany would be a key player in NATO's response. Bodeman stresses that NATO would have to respond with its defense plans and mobilize allied forces if Russia conducted a maneuver on NATO's eastern flank with the potential to threaten NATO territory. And with Germany's central position, the bulk of that mobilization would run through German soil. This places the country directly in the crosshairs. However, it's important to note that Bodeman is speaking hypothetically, as he clearly states that he's not saying that Russia will attack. He does, however, say that Russia isn't just threatening, but is also actually capable of acting suddenly. But this action might not be what you expect. That's why the interviewer, Christian Nietzsche, brings up the little green men from Crimea. For context, the little green men were the unmarked Russian soldiers who appeared in Crimea in 2014 suddenly and without warning. These troops, wearing Russian-style uniforms but with no identifying insignia, took control of key sites, including government buildings and military installations. At the time, President Putin denied their Russian identity, calling them local self-defense units, only to later admit their involvement after the operation had succeeded. This tactic was a key part of Russia's strategy in Crimea, and Bodeman suggests it could easily be repeated in other NATO territories. In his conversation with Nietzsche, he acknowledges that something like this could happen in places like Estonia. However, Bodeman also warns that the sudden appearance of such forces might not be the only warning sign. He points to subtler indicators, like the movement of critical resources, such as blood reserves, toward borders. If you start moving blood reserves to the border and this is noticed, then it means something, he explains. This suggests not just a show of force, but an actual intent to act, signaling that Russia's aggression is not always obvious or conventional. It's precisely this kind of stealthy hybrid warfare that NATO needs to be prepared for, especially when you consider that a similar event had already happened before Russia invaded Ukraine. That's what makes it so alarming. Reports from US officials noted that Russia began moving blood supplies and medical materials to its borders in late January 2022, signaling that Moscow was preparing for an escalation. As retired US Lieutenant General Ben Hodges explained, "You would not execute an attack unless you have that in hand." In other words, the presence of blood reserves is a concrete sign that Russia was preparing for casualties, readying itself for a full-scale military operation. These new reports of similar logistical preparations tell NATO that Russia is beyond the stage of mere posturing, though truthfully NATO has known this for quite some time. That's why it has significantly increased its military presence in the east. Russia might be preparing for a war with NATO, but NATO won't be caught off guard, that's for sure. In fact, NATO has been long ready for such a scenario, particularly in response to Russia's aggression and its increasingly unpredictable behavior. The alliance has taken deliberate and decisive steps to bolster its military presence along its eastern flank, which directly addresses concerns raised by Bodeman regarding a potential Russian maneuver. Since 2017, NATO has been enhancing its forward presence, particularly in countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, with multinational battle groups led by the UK, Canada, Germany, and the US respectively. These battle groups serve as a visible demonstration of NATO's resolve and its commitment to defend its territory. However, the urgency of NATO's military preparedness was accelerated after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO expanded its eastern presence by doubling the number of battle groups in the region, adding more forces to Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. This brought the total to 8 multinational battle groups, significantly increasing the number of boots on the ground. But NATO's military readiness isn't just a show of force. It involves robust logistics, interoperability, and swift mobilization. With the inclusion of Finland and Sweden into NATO and the growing integration of various military units across member states, NATO's eastern flank is now a highly fortified and interconnected region. This is crucial because any threat to Germany is, in essence, a threat to the entire alliance. Remember, an attack on one is an attack on all. That's what Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is all about. Article 5 is at the core of NATO's strength, a promise that each member is bound to come to the defense of others in times of need. It was crafted in 1949 in response to the threat of the Soviet Union's expansion across Europe. The principle of collective defense was designed to deter aggression by ensuring that any attack on one member will be met with a unified, powerful response from all. It turns every NATO member into a shield for the others, and no country is left vulnerable or alone. But Article 5 also sets a high bar. It's not invoked lightly. In fact, this article was only ever invoked once, after the September 11 attacks in 2001, when the US was targeted by terrorists. So if anyone thinks NATO is just waiting for one wrong move to pounce on Russia, they couldn't be more mistaken. That's also what Bodeman hammers home in his interview. He emphasized that NATO's defense plans, including Germany's operational strategies, are not about preparing for war at all costs. Instead, they are designed to deter aggression and avoid escalation. Bodeman points out that NATO's primary goal is to prevent conflict by being ready to mobilize in a way that de-escalates tensions, especially in the event of a Russian threat along NATO's eastern flank. The idea is to stop things from getting to the point where war becomes a necessity, which is why the plans are designed to keep things in check long before a state of defense is even declared. If we achieve that, we have accomplished everything, he concludes. But here's the thing, Putin won't make this achievement easy. As Bodeman notes, the real concern is that Putin may have more aggressive ambitions than NATO's careful deterrence strategies can prevent. In fact, he's already taking significant steps to rebuild and strengthen Russia's military, which certainly raises the stakes. Putin has long expressed his desire to restore territories once part of the Soviet Union, and now intelligence reports indicate that Russia is heavily investing in its military. The worst part? These investments aren't about replacing what was lost in Ukraine. Bodeman highlights that Russia is producing between 1,000 and 1,500 tanks annually, many of which are being stored and not used in Ukraine. That's why this buildup of military resources signals preparedness for a broader, longer-term strategy. Then there's also the shift in Russian society, where education materials now focus on preparing children for war, and not in a way that teaches how to prevent war, but rather what to do in war, Bodeman explains. These shocking findings underscore just how serious Putin is about his plans. All things considered, he is setting the stage for an even more direct confrontation with NATO in the future. And that future might be closer than you think. If Russia continues its military restructuring and builds up its forces with help from countries like China, Iran, and North Korea, it could be in a position to challenge NATO within the next few years. Germany's intelligence chief, Bruno Karl, said Russia's military restructuring is one of the largest since 2008, signaling a clear preparation for potential conflict with the West by 2030. That's only 5 years into the future. And that's why NATO's goal, as Bodeman sees it, is not just to prevent war, but to be prepared if it inevitably comes. His words resonate deeply, reminding us what's at stake. If it comes to this, we will be ready to defend what we hold dear. Now, a full military confrontation might still be a few years away, but this doesn't mean that Germany isn't already facing the looming dangers of Russian threats. Only these threats are hybrid. Bodeman doesn't mince his words here. He says that Germany isn't at war formally and legally. However, he believes that his country hasn't been at peace for a long time either. You see, Germany faces a large number of hybrid attacks every day, a phenomenon that is noticeably increasing, according to Bodeman. These attacks often don't involve traditional warfare, but rather covert tactics designed to destabilize and undermine the state. For instance, there are tangible threats already present within Germany, including the discovery of military-grade explosives near NATO facilities. These explosives were found buried close to critical infrastructure, like the NATO pipeline system, designed to supply fuel to military bases. The purpose behind these acts? Well, it's unclear, according to Bodeman. Who benefits from this, and for what purpose could it be used? He asks. The worrying part is that such acts aren't isolated. They could very well be part of a larger strategy to probe vulnerabilities, test weaknesses, and prepare for more significant disruptions. It's not just about military action anymore. It's about subtly shifting the balance of power, creating chaos under the radar. It's a threat that is as silent as it is dangerous, and it's right on Germany's doorstep. In fact, hybrid warfare could very well be the primary method through which Germany is attacked. And Nietzsche and Bodeman discuss this scenario in their conversation. The interviewer begins by referencing a 2023 American film, Leave the World Behind, to frame a hypothetical scenario about how a country could be attacked. He describes how the film shows that an attack doesn't necessarily need to involve missiles. Instead, it's about taking down communications networks, disrupting transportation, and spreading disinformation to create chaos from within. He then asks Bodeman whether such a scenario is one of the threats he considers when thinking about hybrid warfare. Bodeman responds by acknowledging that the situation described in the film isn't just fiction. In fact, it's already happening. He explains that modern hybrid warfare involves more than just physical confrontation. It can include disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, and other disruptive actions that don't involve direct military force. He adds that through cyber attacks, critical infrastructure like energy providers, transportation hubs, and even ports can be targeted and brought to a halt without firing a single shot. One of the most alarming forms of hybrid threats, Bodeman stresses, is sabotage. Though Bodeman doesn't dive into the specifics, it's clear that sabotage is a growing concern for Germany. Recent incidents are proving the point. For example, holes mysteriously appeared in fences of water facilities surrounding German military bases. This isn't just a random act, it's a deliberate vulnerability being exposed. That's why Germany has been on high alert for a few years now. With its continued military support for Ukraine, suspicion of Russian involvement is constantly rising. As Bodeman puts it, there isn't always Putin's business card lying there as evidence, or a proverbial smoking gun to definitively prove who is behind each attack or act of sabotage. However, more often than not, these attacks are eventually directly tied to Russia. Take, for instance, the alleged plot to assassinate Rheinmetall's CEO, Germany's top weapons manufacturer. The plot was uncovered in July 2024. In January 2025, NATO's Deputy Assistant Secretary General, James Apatory, confirmed reports that Armin Purpurga was targeted in a Russian-backed assassination plot. This is no ordinary threat. It's a full-on attempt to destabilize key players in the defense industry, and it's coming straight from Russia. And this is just one of the many incidents that conveniently benefit Russia. There's also the high-profile security blunder. A Luftwaffe phone call was tapped by foreign agents. This was a major embarrassment for Berlin and a sign of the gaps in their counterintelligence systems. But sabotage doesn't stop with spying. There's also the targeted disruption of critical infrastructure. Just recently, 2 German-Russian nationals were arrested for plotting to sabotage US military bases in Bavaria. This isn't just a one-off issue, it's part of a wider trend. But the most dramatic act of sabotage, the Nord Stream pipeline explosion in 2022. On September 26, 2022, a series of underwater explosions damaged 3 out of 4 Nord Stream pipelines, causing significant gas leaks and rendering them inoperable. While we're still uncertain about the perpetrators, the fact that it happened shows just how vulnerable critical infrastructure can be. And it's not just Germany. Other European countries are experiencing similar acts of sabotage. But with Germany hosting many US military bases, it's particularly exposed. The German government knows it needs to take action. That's why it adopted the Crisis Umbrella Act, designed to protect critical infrastructure. Bodeman is optimistic about Germany's efforts, but he's quick to point out the challenges that remain. He also highlights the increased strategic importance of the Baltic Sea, with pipelines and undersea cables running through it. These areas are crucial, and that's why they've been targeted by sabotage attempts. That's also why Germany is stepping up its game. Naval patrols are more frequent, and they've increased cooperation with NATO. As Bodeman explains, we're much better networked than in the past. There's also better coordination with critical infrastructure operators, including port owners and shipping companies, which help track any suspicious activities. It's a smart move, no doubt. As Bodeman puts it, every wind turbine is now a sensor, showing how even the smallest details matter in this defense effort. Still, the threat has evolved. Bodeman admits that it's not enough just to watch ships. The rise of underwater drones and unmanned vehicles complicates the situation. He notes, "We have Navy special forces, divers and combat swimmers, but what if we have to defend against underwater robots?" Germany is making progress, but it's clear there's a long road ahead. As the risks grow, Bodeman stresses that a more robust response will be needed to stay ahead of these evolving threats. While Germany is enhancing its defense against sabotage, the bigger question remains, is the country prepared for a full-scale military attack? With rising tensions in Europe and the ongoing war in Ukraine, it's crucial to assess Germany's readiness for a more severe and direct threat. That's why Nietzsche poses a blunt question. How well prepared is Germany for a real crisis? Bodeman doesn't hesitate. He gets straight to the point. He explains that Germany has been working with a large team, around 150 people, including members from the Bundeswehr, various federal ministries, and other organizations, to devise a robust response plan for potential threats, and the plan wasn't rushed. Bodeman notes they spent well over 100 days in classified settings working out every detail. This shows just how meticulous and well thought out Germany's preparation is for a major crisis. A key component of this preparation is the Germany Hub concept. This involves ensuring that Germany is able to protect its own borders. That's concern number one. But concern number two is supporting NATO's defense plans. Bodeman highlights the importance of logistical support in moving military convoys across German territory. How do we ensure that an American convoy, for an example, which lands in Vlissingen, Netherlands, moves through the Netherlands, crosses Germany's various federal states, and reaches Poland and Lithuania with full logistical support, he asks. This question gets to the heart of the matter. Germany must ensure smooth, rapid troop movements while still operating within the legal framework of peacetime. Bodeman's descriptions are pretty on par with Germany's previously unveiled plan, Operation Deutschland. This over 1,000 pages long plan is specifically designed for a large-scale crisis and prompted by Russia's actions in Europe. It outlines how the country would protect critical infrastructure, help mobilize up to 800,000 troops, facilitate the movement of up to 200,000 military assets, and prepare civilians for an emergency. Speaking of civilians, Bodeman also discusses what would happen to them if Russia attacked Germany. Germany can't just rely on the military, Bodeman explains. The civilian population would be critical in keeping the country running. With active troops likely stationed on NATO's eastern flank, Germany's main task would be logistical support. But instead of the Bundeswehr running everything, civilian businesses would step in. For example, private fuel companies would supply convoys and caterers would provide meals instead of military kitchens. It's not quite a call for everyone to fire up their grills, but it does show how civilians would step in to make sure the military gets fed, even if it's through the humble power of a sandwich, as Nietzsche humorously points out. But it's not just about logistics. Hospitals would face an overwhelming influx of casualties. We're talking about far greater numbers than in Afghanistan or Mali, Bodeman warns. The sheer scale would push the civilian healthcare system into overdrive. Civilian hospitals would need to team up with military hospitals to handle blast and gunshot wounds. Doctors need to be ready to handle injuries and wound patterns they don't typically see in everyday hospitals, he adds. And it doesn't stop there. In a full-scale crisis, companies would need to keep running because life must go on, Bodeman insists. Whether it's maintaining supply chains or keeping shops open, businesses will be essential for Germany to stay functional. He reflects on the situation in Ukraine. People still go to work and visit cafes. We must ensure that life continues as normally as possible, he concludes. This normalcy will give people a chance to get away from the war for a few moments, as Bodeman puts it. However, it's also the exact opposite of what the enemy wants to achieve. The enemy wants to prevent us from having this semblance of normal life, he explains. So leading a somewhat normal life becomes a powerful form of resistance in itself. But what do you think? Will Germany need this or any kind of resistance anytime soon? And what do you think of Lieutenant General Bodeman's predictions and views? Do you agree with all of them? We're looking forward to hearing from you in the comments section below.
A war with Iran will be World War III. So that's the point. Iran is not alone, and it will not remain alone. And so if we go to war with Iran, we are expanding the war with Russia. With Russia, we are at a possibility of peace, but we're also at a possibility of nuclear war. They're both very close. And if we go to war with Iran, we make the war, nuclear war, all the more likely.
Attention, Canadians. Do you feel disconnected from our current political system? This could be our last chance to take a real legal stand for our rights. It's time to shift the political power to its rightful owners, the Canadian citizens and Indigenous peoples of Canada. Dive into our history, understand the need for change, and embark on the quest for true democracy. Are you concerned about our nation's commitment to human rights and self-governance? The power shift to freedom aligns with vital treaties and international laws enabling us to claim our rightful place as collective head of state. We advocate legally replacing the crown, King Charles III, and our partocracy system with a true democracy, the peoples as the true collective head of state with veto power over our governance, to ensure your voice counts more than party interests. When our national collective civil and political rights are respected, your influence on policies will be direct and impactful. Join us on this noble struggle to make every Canadian and Indigenous peoples a meaningful participant in our future as collective head of state, which was legally owed and kept from us since the patriation of our Constitution, an official decolonization from the United Kingdom of 1982. It's time to correct the past of our government's lies and omissions to the people of our great country before it is too late. People 15 years old and over can sign our Canadian People's Referendum at canadianreferendum.ca and unite for our rights as the collective head of state in our Constitution. Together, we can be the example in reshaping Canada's future, not just for us, but for all peoples worldwide, once and for all. Are you ready to be part of this transformative movement? Join the Power Shift to Freedom movement by the Canadian People's Union and be part of a bold vision for Canada's future. Visit thecpu.ca for more details. Embrace and face the change required on your part to shape our future.